morning, wherever we're finding you. My name is Kyle Weatherall. I'm happy to be speaking with you again today. With us on the call, we have our President and Vice Chancellor, Dr. Kevin Walmsley, who I'll pass the mic to now to welcome everyone.
Well, thank you very much, Kyle, and certainly thank you to all of our panelists today. Marion, Elizabeth, and Eves is here as well. It is my pleasure on behalf of Nipissing University to welcome all of you to the session in anticipation of your arrival in September. We're very excited about that, and I'm sure that you are too, and maybe you're a little bit nervous. As your president, I try and anticipate how you feel about starting your journey with Nipissing University and all of the things that you have to consider. And I guess my answer is, well, I can't imagine what it's like to pack up and head to another country so far away and to start a new chapter in this part of your lives. I think it's very exciting, takes a lot of courage on your part. And we're very pleased that you chose Nipissing University as your destination. And this is part of our series to help you in your transition, to answer your questions, and to make you feel a little more relaxed and confident about your journey to Canada and to North Bay in particular. I can tell you that our faculty members are in their research period now and also working on their classes for the fall and getting ready to welcome you to Nipissing in September. And our great staff members, we have two of them here today, and Kyle and Eves, whose job it is to make your life easier and to answer your questions. And we're very proud to have these two fine folks with us here today and on our staff. And indeed, all of our staff pride themselves in being able to assist our students and provide the necessary services at Nipissing. That's what makes us really good. And so we're very interested in helping you out, but also to hear how your experience was in the future. And so we look forward to that. And I also must say that we have a terrific group of 4,000 students on campus who are anticipating your arrival and can't wait to meet you. And so I'll be very excited to see you in person. And today, very specifically, we're going to be talking about immigration, and we have our two experts on board, Elizabeth Long and Mary McDonald. We'll have many other times to talk about other issues like our academic programs and our services and our beautiful campus, housing issues, food, clothing, all of those other things we'll be able to manage on other days. And I encourage you, all students, please continue to ask questions and get the answers. And that's why we're here, and we're very pleased to be here. So on behalf of our crew at Nipissing University, welcome to you all, and I can't wait to meet you in September. So passing it back to you, Kyle. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And yes, we are so excited to welcome you all here in the fall. And there's so many things to think about, but we will definitely use this time to focus most on your immigration questions. And with that, we'll pass it to our two experts from Long Mango G LLP, Mary McDonald and Elizabeth Long, to share with you what they've prepared.
Hi, everyone. Great to meet you all. So you guys are all in the exciting situation where you're going to come to Canada soon and study at Nipissing. Congratulations on that. Today, what we're going to be covering is we're going to be looking at three things. One is, what do you need to do to come to Canada and activate your study permits? We're going to also talk about how it is that you are going to study in Canada, make sure that you are going to maintain your status, what you can do legally, what you shouldn't do while you're studying and working. And then we're going to talk a little bit about permanent residence at the end as well. Now, before we get started on the presentation, I just wanted to do some housekeeping. First of all, if you do have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can type it in there. Now, I just wanted to tell you a few things about your questions. Today, we're not in a situation where we are going to be able to answer your personal questions. Personal questions is something like, well, this happened to me. I'm not sure what to do. Please help me. That's not what today is, okay? This is not a private forum. People can see your questions. So please make sure that you can absolutely ask general questions such as, you know, if this situation is the case, what can we do? What do you suggest about this law? Like, what's going on with this situation? We can answer general questions, but not personal questions today. If you later on, we will certainly have some information about how you can contact us about your personal questions, and we can set up a consultation to deal with those. Okay. The second thing is I am only here to answer immigration questions. I'm not part of the university. Now, Kyle and Eves, you guys may be able to answer some of these other administrative questions as well, and maybe you can type those out on the Q&A. Okay, so we'll start with the presentation, and at the end, we'll try to answer as many questions as we can, time allowing. Okay?
Sorry, Elizabeth, can I just interrupt briefly?
Yes.
Just to encourage everyone, this session is for immigration, and these are experts on this end. We want to maximize this time to talk about immigration. Anything outside immigration, would strongly encourage you to put those on the side. We'll have various sessions for those other needs. Let's maximize today for the immigration part of it.
Thank you so much, Eves. All right, so let's get started here. Okay, just wanted to make sure the right screen is showing. Is that right? Okay, excellent. Okay, so my name is Elizabeth Lawn, and Mary McDonald is here. So we're lawyers at the law firm of Law Mangoji. We practice immigration law at our firm, only immigration law. And our office is in Toronto, but we certainly help people from around the world. Okay. So the first thing I wanted to talk to you guys about is what you need to do to come to Canada. Okay, so now you've submitted your applications for your study permits, and hopefully you will be receiving your approval letters if you haven't already done so yet. Now, for those people who are still waiting for the study permit approvals, we still have some time. If you've already submitted your application, the processing time right now average is 6 weeks. It could be that your application is decided much sooner, but sometimes it's just a waiting game. Now, when you do get your passport request, that means that your study permit is basically approved. Do submit your passports right away to the VAC, the Visa Application Center. And normally the passports and visas are issued back to you in around a week or two. Okay. So when you come to Canada, you're going to bring with you that study permit approval letter that you would have received from IRCC. Normally it's uploaded to the portal. Okay. And if you guys are doing any co-op work, you should also receive a co-op work permit approval letter to allow you to also activate your work permit as well at the border. Now, most of you will need a visa that's attached to your passports. That's when you would have sent in your passport after you receive the requests. If you are from a visa exempt country, you may need an ETA. Unless you're American. Americans, you don't need any ETAs or visas. You just need the approval letters. Okay. So what you want to do is when you get these letters and the visas, then you can get ready to come to Canada. Bring with you the approval letters and your passports, of course. But also you may want to bring with you some sort of proof that you have been accepted at the school. You're going to start the school. Sometimes at the airport, the officers want to make sure that you're actually going to be starting at Nipissing. So if you, for example, paid for housing, student housing, or if you have at least, bring your acceptance letters and etc. And, your flights should show that you're going to North Bay and not to, just staying in Toronto, for example. Or if you are going to be staying in Toronto, you're going to be driving up, you need to let the officers know if they ask you. If they don't ask you, then that's fine. Okay. So when you do come into Canada, you're going to be going through the machines, going through your biometrics, and they're going to get your fingerprints and your iris scans. Then you're going to go to the customs officer. The customs officer will say, what do you want to do in Canada? They'll say, I'm here to study. And then they'll send you to the immigration office, where you will have your study permit printed out and your work permit, co-op work permit printed out as well. Now, it's very important, once you get your study permit, that you look at it very carefully in front of the officer, okay? Oftentimes, there are mistakes. For example, sometimes the study permits on there say that you're not authorized to work. That is not supposed to be on there. If you have that on there, then you may not be able to get a social insurance number, okay? And which will allow you to work. So if you see that on there, ask the officer to take it off, because you are supposed to be able to work with your study permits. Sometimes, for example, they will say you can't work in healthcare. And if you already have completed your medicals, then that restriction should not be in there. Okay, so look at it really, really carefully. And if there are any changes that need to be made, ask the officer to change it right there and then. If you don't and you leave, it could be very difficult to change your study permit to be the correct study permit. And it'll probably, if you do it inside Canada, it could be waiting for several weeks or months to get it to be changed. Okay, so make sure everything, when you get your study permit printed out, you check all the conditions on your study permit, everything is correct. Okay, same for your work, for your co-op work permit, that should be issued to the length of time as your study permit. So make sure that that's there. Now the study permit, the length of the study permit should be issued for 90 days past the date of your completion of your studies. So if you're finishing your studies, for example, on April 2024, you should have a study permit issued to July 2024, end of July 2024. Sometimes the officers just give it to you for until the end of April. Ask them to issue it for 90 days afterwards. The only time when your study permit should be issued earlier than that is if your passport expires earlier. If your passport expires earlier, then you can only get your study permit and work permit issued to the expiry date of your passport. Okay. All right. I see some people have raised their hands. We don't answer any raised hands in this session. You can put in your question and answers at the Q&A on the bottom of your screen, and then we'll try to answer your questions then. Okay? All right.
Okay. So when you hold a study permit, it also opens up some options for your close family members. So if you're married, your spouse can get an open work permit so that they can work while you study. So this applies if you're married or common law married. And common law married is different than being legally married. So you could be legally married, or if you've lived with your partner for 12 months, immigration considers that to be called common law married. And so if you've lived with your partner for 1 whole year, this you could be considered common law married, and your partner could be eligible for an open work permit. So this is really important to keep in mind while you're in Canada, because many of immigration's programs are impacted by this common law marriage rule. So if you're living with your partner for 12 months, they could be considered your spouse under Canadian immigration law. Your children are also able to accompany you and study while you're here in Canada as well. So they can attend grade school on a study permit or a visitor record. And because you as their parent have a study permit, they don't have to pay international student fees for grade school. And they could also be eligible for an open work permit if they want to work. And I
So
think
just a
Elizabeth,
note
yeah.
on, it's just a note on the common law status. So, here's the thing, common law is not dependent on your commitment to the other person. It doesn't matter. We don't care if you love that person or not. Okay. Common law is when you have been living in a conjugal relationship. So not roommates, obviously. Okay. But in a marriage-like situation with someone for at least 1 year. Now, you may already have that in your situation, or when you come to Canada, you may start living with someone for at least 1 year. And it is very important to mark that anniversary where you have been in a common law status relationship with someone for at least 1 year. On all of your application forms, whether it's study permits, work permits, permanent residence, any of those forms, they will ask, what is your marital situation? It'll say married, where you're legally married, common law status, or single. And if you are common law, you have to state that you are common law, okay? Like I said, it's not about your commitment or whatever to that person or whether or not you're in love. It's if you have been living together for 1 year, you are common law. So make sure you don't misrepresent yourself on the application forms, because that could be very, very important. That could be a very important consequence on you in that situation. All right. Now, let's talk about studying and working on a study permit in Canada. The first rule that you have to understand is when you come to Canada, it doesn't matter how long your study permit is valid for. If you do not actively pursue studies, if you are not going to attend classes and study, then you lose your status within 90 days. 90 days after you stop studying, you will no longer have student status in Canada. You will be out of status, okay? There are two exceptions to this rule. The first one is scheduled breaks. So, for example, in your school, you have summer breaks, right? Or other scheduled breaks in the school calendar. That's fine. On your scheduled breaks, you don't lose your status, right? Because this is what the school has already determined on its academic calendar. The second one is authorized leave. Authorized leave is for you as an individual. What authorized leave is that you can get authorized leave of up to 150 days. So for up to 1 semester, for example, where you ask the school first to give you permission to have a leave of absence from your studies. And before you go on your leave, you have to get the authorized leave from the school. Most of the time, it's due to some personal reasons, such as health reasons, or maybe financial reasons, or maybe you failed a semester and you need some time to think about things, or whatever it is. It's up to the school. If the school gives you authorized leave, only then can you leave for, it's only up to 150 days, okay? Otherwise, if you just stop going to school, then you will lose your status 90 days, okay, after you stop studying. Now, if you are going to decide to switch your programs, if it is within the school, that's not such an issue. If you decide to switch programs and it's outside of the institution, you must notify immigration that you are switching schools. If you don't notify them, then that would be a breach, okay? If it's outside of Canada, you're outside of Canada and you decide you don't want to go to Nipissing, then you have to apply for another study permit. If you're inside Canada and you're going to switch to another school, you have to notify the IRCC, you don't have to get another study permit. But make sure that you know that you can't just drop out of school. If you drop out of school and you don't go to anything, then you lose your status in 90 days, okay? I think, and as we go along today, you will see that by you guys choosing Nipissing, you guys have chosen a really good advantage with regard to immigration. Not only is it a good school, it really provides you with a lot of options that other schools in other cities do not give you, okay? So, all right, so talking about working now, working while you are studying, okay? So first of all, we're talking about work that is outside of the co-op work permit. Some of you guys may have co-op work permits, great. But that co-op work permit only allows you to work in co-op programs. Those are programs that are necessary for your studies. It does not allow you to work anywhere else. If you're not doing a co-op program, that work permit does not allow you to work there. However, if you are a full-time student at Nipissing, okay, you can work part-time, 20 hours a week while you are studying, and full-time during scheduled breaks. Now, last year, there was a special provision allowing some students to work full-time. But that does not pertain to you guys, okay? For you guys are subject to the regular rules where you can only work 20 hours a week outside of the campus. You can work full-time on campus as well. So if you have a job on the Nipissing campus, you can work full-time there. You can do full-time on campus and part-time off campus. I don't know how you're going to get any studying done, but that is also possible there as well. Okay, but you can only do so if you're a full-time student. If you switch to part-time, or if you are not studying at all, then you cannot work. The only exception is in the last semester. In the last semester, if you're a part-time student, you can work still off campus. Now, once you've completed your studies, very important, okay? We often get people who are confused about this situation. But once you have completed your studies, the earliest time that you have received notice by the school that you've completed your studies, you are then no longer a student. You have to stop working at that time, okay? You can work again, we'll talk about the post-grad work permit, but you can start working again for the post-grad work permit situation. But until that time, you have to stop working, okay? Now, there is one exception to the rule, and that is if you decide to work in between programs. So if it's, for example, less than 150, so if you finish your undergrad and then you're going to go and do a master's, for example, then in between those programs, and you've already been accepted to the master's, then you can actually work in that summer in between for a semester, okay? Other than that, you have to stop working when you finish your studies.
Okay, so something that's going to be really important while you're here in Canada is always making sure that you have status while you're here. So it's very, very important that once you get your study permit, you check and you look at the date that's listed on your study permit as the expiry date. So mark this date down and pay attention to it because, for example, if your study permit expires before you complete your program of study, it's really important that you apply to extend your study permit so that you stay in status while you're studying. And that brings me to another important thing, which is implied status. So it's important to understand what implied status is. So in that example, so when you submit an extension application, so say your study permit expires before you complete your program, as long as you submit an application to extend your study permit before the expiry date of your study permit, you'll hold what's called implied or maintained status while you're waiting for a decision on that application. So as long as you apply for the extension before your expiry date, you can continue studying in Canada while you're waiting for IRCC to actually process the extension or application and give you a decision. So if you have implied status, though, it does require you to be in Canada while you wait for a decision on the new application. If you leave Canada, your implied status will end. And then let's say you wake up one day and you realize, oops, I actually missed the expiry date on my study permit. It has already expired. So then you need to restore your status. So from the day that your study permit expires, you would have 90 days to apply to restore your status. So if you've lost your status, you can apply to get your status back by submitting a restoration application. And it's really important to keep that 90-day timeline in mind. So IRCC is very strict about the 90 days. And if you've missed that deadline on your study permit, or when you apply for your extension, if it was refused, keep in mind that you have 90 days to apply to restore your status. If it's that your study permit expired, you have 90 days from the date of expiry on your permit. And if you applied for an extension and the extension application gets refused, you have 90 days from the refusal letter date to submit a restoration application.
All right. So let's talk about your post-grad work permit, okay? So this is really your golden ticket to getting permanent residence because, you know, there are very few open work permits available. And, you know, the post-grad work permit is one of those few. What do I mean by open work permit? It means that you can work anywhere you want when you graduate. It's an open work permit. Most of the time, if you haven't studied in Canada, you're not entitled to the postgrad work permit. In order to get a work permit in Canada, you have to have a labor market impact assessment. That means your employer would have to not only offer you a job, they would have to apply to the labor market to show that they can't find a Canadian to do the job. It's very difficult to get a LMIA in that situation, okay? So the postgrad work permit is a golden ticket. Now, you only get one golden ticket in your lifetime. So it's very important that you understand and you know the strategy for how you're going to get your work experience and how you're going to get your permanent residence, okay? So the length of your postgrad work permit coincides with the length of your program. So if your program is only up to 1 year, or only up to, let's say, 16 months, anything up to 2 years, you only get that length of the program. So if it's a 1 year program, you get a 1 year work permit. If it's a 1.5 year program, you get 1.5 year work permit. If, however, your program is 2 years or more, then you get a 3 year work permit. Now, that difference in the length of time could be the difference between you being able to get the work experience you need in order to get permanent residence. So that's very, very important, okay? If you're only doing a 1 year program and you did another 1 year program right after that, both of these programs are in Canada, then you would be eligible for also a 3 year work permit, okay? So the distance education programs are very important that you don't just do your programs remotely, because if your program is less than 50% of your program, then you will not be eligible for the postgrad work permit, okay? So make sure that you are going to attend your classes as well at the campus, okay? Now, very, very important, when you study, in order to get the postgrad work permit, you have to maintain full-time status in every semester of your program, not counting the last semester, okay? So sometimes people say, okay, well, you know what? I'm doing my full-time, but I'm not doing so well in my course. I'm going to drop out of a couple of them. And so my grades will be better. That's a huge issue for international students such as yourself, because you need the postgrad work permit at the end, okay? Do not go part-time during your program, except for the last semester. Do not go part-time because you will not be eligible for the postgrad work permit. You have to maintain your full-time student status. The only exceptions, like I said, is the final semester, and if the school gives you authorized leave. So if the school says you can take the leave, you can take the entire semester. You have to take the entire semester off, okay? You don't go part-time, okay? Take the entire semester off, and then you can come back and go back full-time, and then you're eligible for the postgrad work permit. So I'm going to tell you guys when you can apply for your postgrad work permit. And this is very important, okay? The website says that you can apply for your postgrad work permit 180 days for immigration. But IRCC, when they tell you that, it's very misleading, because if you apply, let's say 170 days, and that's all you do is apply for your postgrad work permit, then your application will be denied. Okay, it's because you need to have valid student status when you apply for your postgrad work permit. So keep this rule in mind. To apply for your postgrad work permit, you need to apply when your study permit is still valid and within 90 days of when you first received the notice that you've completed your studies. Okay, if you do so, then you can work full-time as soon as you've submitted your application. You don't have to have the work permit in hand. As soon as you've submitted the application, then you can start working full-time. Okay, so let's go through this timeline. When you finish your program, when you first get your notification from the school that you finished your program, you have to stop working. You can start working again if you apply for your postgrad work permit 90 days, or if your study permit expires earlier, the date of your study permit expiry. And if you do so, then you can start working full-time right away. Now, if your study permits expire earlier before you can finish your program, and that's probably because a lot of times it's because, you know, your passport has expired earlier, or maybe you're changing programs, you need to extend. Be sure to file the extension for your study permit well before your study permit expires, right? So Mary has said, you know, you can get implied status as long as you applied before. But in order to start working, you have to have a valid study permit while you're waiting for your postgrad work permit. Okay, so make sure you get your study permit well in advance. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to move on to talking about permanent residence, and we will have another session at Nipissing to go into a lot of the details for permanent residence. Today, we're just going to touch on some of the things that you need to know about permanent residence.
Okay, so once you graduate, as Elizabeth mentioned, you could get your postgrad work permit, which will allow you to work for any employer in Canada. You'll find that after you graduate, many of the programs for permanent residency require you to do high-skilled work and get high-skilled work experience. So it's really important to have a good understanding of the difference between high-skilled and low-skilled work, and to understand if your job that you'll be taking involves high-skilled work. So immigration has categorized all the different jobs into what are called national occupation codes, NOC codes. And the NOC codes are divided into 6 different levels, so which are called tiers. Tiers 0, 1, 2, and 3 are considered high-skilled jobs, whereas tier 4 and 5 are considered low-skilled work. So just last year, this entire system was reorganized by immigration, and some jobs that were previously considered low-skilled are now considered high-skilled. Some of examples are listed on the slide here: truck drivers, nurse aides, personal support workers, etc. And then actually some jobs that were considered high skilled are now considered low skilled, and you can see some examples there. So understanding the skill level of your work is really important. And don't make the mistake of just relying on what your friends have done in the past or what other people did, because as I said, the laws did change just last year, and you really need to make sure that your work is going to qualify you for permanent residency if you want to keep those options open. We've also included a list here of all of the different knocks and how they've changed in the November 2022 change, so you can take a look at that as well. But this is a vital aspect to understand and get advice on if you're not sure.
And just to build on what Mary has said about changes, immigration law in Canada changes all of the time. Every month or so, we will have a huge change in immigration law. And so what we tell you today is true today, but in 3 or 4 years' time, definitely the laws will be very different. And so the only way that we're really able to touch base with you after you leave the session on changes to the law is through emails. We'll email out newsletters about changes. And what we'll do is everyone who has registered, we will put you on that list of notifications. Certainly, if you don't like receiving, you can always opt out of it, but we will put you on there so that at least, important changes that may affect you, you'll get some notice through our newsletters there. Okay, now I'm going to start talking about the first system for permanent residents, and that's called Express Entry. Many of you may have already heard about Express Entry. Express Entry is the most popular application with regard to permanent residents, especially for skilled workers. Okay, and so here's how Express Entry works. So first, to start, you have to create an online profile. You get to create an online profile if you have if you qualified under one of 3 categories, and we'll go over those categories, but it's federal skilled worker, Canadian experience class, federal skilled trades. And when you create a profile, you get to enter the Express Entry pool. Now, a lot of people say, well, I'm in the pool, so I've applied for permanent residence. That is not true. Just because you have entered the pool does not mean that you have applied for permanent residence. When you enter the pool, you're just saying to the government, okay, I qualified under one of these 3 categories and I'm interested. Okay, and what the government has said is, well, okay, great, you're interested. We'll give you a series of points based on your background and whether or not you have provincial nomination. Then every couple of weeks or so, the government will have a draw where they invite certain people to apply. It's only after you receive this invitation to apply that you can actually apply for permanent residence. Okay, so who is it that they are going to invite to apply? We shall talk about that. Okay, but a lot of it will be based on, most of the time, it's going to be based on your points for Express Entry and provincial nomination. Beyond that, they are now also looking at things like French levels and occupations, what you have work experience in. So first, let's talk about how to get into the pool. Okay, now if you have at least 1 year of high skilled work experience, you may already be able to get into the pool. To get into the pool under the federal skilled worker class, first you have to have 1 year of high skilled work experience in one occupation that is full-time, so at least 30 hours a week, or you can add, part-time 15 hours over 2 years, for example, together, but at least 30 hours a week. And so 1 year high skilled full-time work experience in one occupation. Okay, when you look at that, if you have that work experience, and then you have to pass your language exam. So we're looking at a CLB level of 7, which is equal to 6 in your IELTS. Then we look at other background information, looking at your age, education, age, etc. You need to have financial savings. So many of you, if you already have that work experience under your belt, you may be able to enter the pool. Just because you can enter the pool doesn't mean that you'll be selected, though. Okay, this is just to enter the pool. Now, the second one is called the Canadian Experience Class. So for those of you who come to Canada, you finish your studies, you get your post-grad work permit, okay, so that you can get your work 1 year of high-skilled. Remember what Mary had told you about high-skilled work experience? Okay, all of this is high-skilled. So 1 year of high-skilled work experience when you have not, when you are not a full-time student. So when you have completed your studies, you have your work experience, 1 year of high-skilled work experience, that where you are employed in Canada by a Canadian employer. Okay, so you need to get what's called a T4 from your employer in Canada. You've worked for 1 year, at least 30 hours a week, so full-time work experience. You can also qualify. Now, you can get this work experience to qualify in your Canadian Experience Class if you have a spouse. So definition of a spouse, like Mary said, is if you're married or if you have common law status. If you're in a common law relationship, okay, then you will also, that your spouse can also get open spousal work permit. And if they have 1 year of work experience, they may also qualify, okay? So that's the Canadian Experience Class. The third one, I'm not going to go into too much. It's about for people in the trades and the construction trades. And for the most part, I think 99% of people will qualify under one of these, the first two categories. Okay. All right, so let's say you're in the pool. Now, how do you get the points so that you're picked out of the pool, you're selected? What do the points mean? So the first one is age. Age, when you get to your 30th birthday, it's no longer happy birthdays afterwards, okay? So in your 30s, the points go down -5, -6. In your 40s, it goes down -10, -11. So by the time you get to your 45th birthday, the good news is you don't have to worry about age anymore. The bad news is you get a big fat 0. Compared to those of you who are in your 20s, you will have 110 points or 100 points if you're married, okay? So with regard to age, there's not a lot you can do about it except apply earlier when you still have as much points as possible. Education. So if you have a 3-year bachelor's degree, that is really good. And it's even better if you have a bachelor's degree from anywhere in the world and another program on top of that. That will also make your points jump. Language. Language becomes sometimes the dividing factor. Most of the time becomes the dividing factor as to whether or not someone can get invited to apply or not. So if you don't have work experience in Canada, especially, you will have to have a CLB of 9, which is a IELTS score of 7 in reading, writing, and speaking, 8 in listening, in order to have a good chance to be selected. Work experience, Canadian work experience is also very important. That's the same kind of work experience that I described for the Canadian Experience Class. It's 1 year of work experience in the last 10 years of work experience where you are not self-employed, you're employed by a Canadian employer, and you're not a full-time student when you're working, okay? So you have 1 year of high-skilled work experience that you've gained in Canada when you're not a full-time student. Foreign work experience, if you have high-skilled work experience outside of Canada, 1 year of work experience, you get some points, or the next level is over 3 years of work experience, you'll get a certain amount of points there. Spouse, again, we're talking about married or common law status. So common law relationships or married spouses, if they're added to your application as a company dependent, then depends on their education, language, and Canadian work experience, whether or not they will add or take away from your points. And provincial nominee programs. So it's very important. Provincial nominations are this. So immigration is a federal jurisdiction. The federal government gets to decide who can become permanent residents and citizens in Canada. But the federal government has made agreements with every province in Canada to allow each province to also select people that they want to get permanent residence. And we're going to talk about the Ontario Provincial Nominee Program in a bit. Now, it's very important to know that there are certain programs for provincial nominee programs that are express entry linked. So that if you get nominated under those express entry linked programs, you get 600 points added to your express entry, which assures that you will be able to be invited to apply. There are other provincial nominee programs that are not express entry linked. If they're not express entry linked, then you will not be able to get 600 points added to express entry. You apply under a completely different program. Okay. So study in Canada. So if you've done your bachelor's or master's in Nipissing, you get 30 points for that. Arranged employment. So this is only for people who have LMIA's employer-specific work permits. You don't get arranged employment points with the postgrad work permit. If you have brothers or sisters in Canada who are permanent residents or Canadians, you get some points. If you're fluent in French, this is very important. If you're fluent in French, you will definitely have a leg up with regards to express entry. Not only will it add a lot of points to you, but I'm going to talk about the special draws for French speakers as well. Okay. And trade certifications, that's more for people in the trades for construction. Okay, so that's the points for express entry. Now, on top of that, remember how I said we have a lot of changes to immigration? Well, this was just announced a few weeks ago. The government is now, on top of your actual points, the government is also talking now about special draws for certain people that they also want to invite. So there is a special draw, for example, for people who have passed the French language proficiency, and the CLB is a CLB of 7. Okay, so if you're fluent in French and you do the French exam, you pass that, then the government once in a while will invite only people who pass those who are in the pool. And so the points, because the pool is a lot smaller for that, the points will be a lot lower. So I think the last draw was in the 300s, for example, for French speakers. Okay. Then the second one is healthcare occupations. So if you have 6 months, so all of these occupations, if you have 6 months of work experience under one of these occupations that are listed, so a lot of healthcare occupations, they'll have special draws for each occupation as well. So the points likely for these occupations will be lower than the general draws. Okay. Healthcare, STEM, trade occupations, transport occupations, agriculture, agri-food occupations. I've put a link here so that you can see what occupations those are. Okay. Now, if you're doing a 4-year program, I can't be certain that at the end of the 4 years, all of these occupations will stay the same. The government has said that every year they're going to put out a list of occupations. So these occupations may change as each year as they go by as well. Okay, so finally, I want to talk to you guys about express entry linked provincial nomination programs. And I'm going to specifically talk to you about the Ontario express entry linked program. So in Ontario, you can't just apply directly to the province. you have to be first in the pool, and then the province will see whether or not they're interested in giving you a notification of interest. Okay. And so some of the categories are the human capital stream, and that's one where they look at your occupation. So a lot of tech occupations, for example, they really like. Sometimes they've invited people in healthcare, etc. Kind of similar to the federal program. Now, whether or not, because this Ontario program, this human capital stream came out before, they may certainly change some of the criteria because the federal program is now doing essentially what they're doing, okay? But for the human capital stream, you need to have a bachelor's degree. Same thing with the French speaking. Again, they're also inviting people who speak French, and that you have to have a bachelor's degree. And finally, the skilled trade. So these are for people who have at least 1 year of work experience in a construction trade in Ontario. They also have a lower draws for that as well. So these are some of the things, you know, sometimes especially if you have a family member, that family member might be interested in doing one of the skilled trades as well, especially your spouse, for example, who have at least 1 year of work experience. So you can kind of team up with your family members, and you know, when you come for a consultation, we will go through a plan for you as to how it is that you're going to get to permanent residence. Okay.
Okay, so Elizabeth mentioned some of the OINP streams that are connected through Express Entry, and there are also a few streams to keep in mind that could provide other options. So these streams have a little bit of a different application process because they're not connected to Express Entry. But as Elizabeth mentioned, you do get into the pool for the Ontario Immigration Nomination Program. So these streams also calculate points a little bit differently as well. So for example, in some of the OINP streams, they give you extra points if you've studied in Northern Ontario or if you have a job offer in Northern Ontario. So the draws for this program, they're also different as well, which again is something to keep in mind. These programs, as Elizabeth mentioned, are subject to change, which is why I'm just giving you a general overview for now, just of ideas that you can think about for your long-term PR plan. But a general idea of some streams that you should keep in mind as students at Nipissing would be, if you get a job offer after you graduate, you could look at the international student stream if it's been under 2 years since you graduated. The foreign worker stream is another program if you have some previous work experience. And then there's also the in-demand stream for specific jobs that Ontario needs. Alternatively, if you are completing a master's or a PhD in Ontario, there are specific streams for graduates of those programs that you could potentially explore as well.
So for those of you who are by yourself, you know, a lot of these programs, they may change, like Mary said, when you graduate. But, you know, they have, a lot of these have been quite stable, like the master's and PhD stream. This has been in place for over a decade. So that probably will stay. These other streams are also quite stable, although sometimes they invite people with different occupations in the past, etc. But they are, you know, there. We can certainly take a look at that for some of your programs when you graduate, or if you have spouses, they may be eligible, for example, for the foreign worker stream or in-demand stream, if they have job offers, okay? But the points allocation, where you are located right now in Northern Ontario, if you study and if you have a job offer in Northern Ontario, they provide you with the most points because of the location. So you guys are certainly in a good position right now, having, you know, been accepted to Nipissing to study there. This is puts you in a really good position for this program. The other, finally, the other program I wanted to speak to you guys about is the RNIP program, the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot Program. And that is specific to only a handful of communities in Canada, and North Bay is one of them. Okay, so again, really good choice as to where you guys are. And so in order to qualify for this, first of all, you either have to have 1 year of qualifying work experience that is on a certain level to the job offer, or better yet, you have either a 2-year study program or you're doing a master's or PhD in the city. Okay, so you know, the fact that you're studying in Nipissing again is great. You have to have a qualifying job offer in order to apply in the community as well. Okay, and that is probably one of the most important things. If you don't have the job offer, we can't apply for this pilot. Okay, language benchmarks, all of you guys should have, either work in Canada, have settlement funds. So this is a really good program because it does allow you to apply for permanent residence separate from express entry, separate from, you know, the Ontario OIMP program. Which program is best suited for you? It really depends on your situation. But again, this is something, you know, a third option for you because you're studying at Nipissing. Okay. All right, so we've talked a lot about different programs. I'm sure you guys are, you know, experiencing maybe some anxiety, maybe some anticipation, but you know, probably some confusion. So here's some practical advice about what you need to do next.
Mhm. So the first piece of advice that we have is to have a plan as to what you need to do to get to your immigration goals. That means not only a short-term plan, but also a long-term plan. So if you're planning on getting PR eventually, make sure that you're taking all the steps to be on the right track, and make sure that you're doing all of the things we mentioned about staying in status, making sure you don't ever misrepresent, and have that plan in place.
Right. And so once you have your plan, then you actually have to execute, right? And I would say planning is, you know, 50%. Execution, though, is also difficult as well, right? So in order to execute the plan, sometimes your plans, your direction, what you need to do may need to change. Maybe you need to change your program. Maybe you need to study and practice exams for the IELTS or, you know, CELPIP or whatnot, right? Make sure you have to have enough time on your work permit when you graduate. So people often ask me, oh, how early, you know, when should I come for a consultation? The earlier, the better. If I can have people come for a consult even before they started studying, that would be the fantastic, but as early as possible. Where you guys are right now, that is a very, very good time to have the consultation to say, okay, you know what, even if it's 3 or 4 years, I need to know what I'm going to be doing. I need to be aware of what it is that I need to do with my life in order to get permanent residence.
And while you're here in Canada, as I mentioned earlier, making sure that you don't do anything to jeopardize that long-term plan, which means staying in status and making sure that you accurately represent yourself on every application that you submit. As Elizabeth mentioned, regarding common law, for example, you need to make sure that you're giving correct information to the government every time that you are making an extension or a new application.
And finally, hopefully this doesn't happen to you, but if your application is rejected, you need to contact a lawyer right away, okay? Do not go to any consultants. Consultants do not have the legal training and they're not allowed to represent people in court. You have to go to an immigration lawyer who has experience in this area. So just to give you an idea, in order to go to federal court to ask for the court to judicially review a decision, you only have 15 days if your decision is made in Canada. If it's outside of Canada, for example, your study permit that you applied for is rejected, you have 60 days to go to court, okay? If you wait beyond this time period, then you're basically shutting yourself out of that system. And sometimes, you know, you can, you know, people think, oh, you know, Canada Canada is nice. Immigration officers in Canada are nice. Immigration, if I call the call center, they're very helpful. I can call them. Okay, and they call them and they say, oh, I don't think this is right. So the call center says, oh, okay, well, let me put a note in your file and we'll see. Okay, or go and write a letter to immigration and they'll help you fix it. Okay, if you do that, first of all, do not trust officers. Do not trust the immigration call center. They are not your friends. Okay, they provide wrong advice all of the time, and they're not going to be held accountable for the kind of wrong advice that they give you. Okay, because they'll say mistake of law is not an excuse. You should have known better. Okay, so if you go and write a letter yourself and ask for a reconsideration, that is your one opportunity. You only get one opportunity to ask for reconsideration. So if you go and ask and then they reject it and you come back to me and say, Elizabeth, now can you ask for reconsideration? I say, sorry, I can't, because you've already had one kick at the can. You only get one reconsideration in your lifetime. Okay, so make sure you just contact a lawyer when you get that rejection. Also, especially when you're in Canada, you may be out of time to file restoration of status or to file your postgrad work permit, your study permit, if you wait too long. Okay, so time is of the essence. If you're applicant, hopefully you hire a good lawyer from the beginning and you don't, have this situation. That's why we have jobs, right? So, so that you can at least, we try to avoid as much as possible these kind of rejections. But if you do get a rejection, make sure you contact a good lawyer. So here is our information. If you wanted to contact us, let us know if you're coming from Nipissing, and we will offer you a student discount on the consultation. Our fee is $100 for Nipissing students. So do let us know that you've watched the webinar and you can get a discount on the consultation. Okay, let's go through some questions.
So I can ask you some of the Q&A questions, Elizabeth. Does that work for you?
Yeah,
Great.
absolutely.
Okay. So the first question that we have is asking for what the meaning of co-op work is.
Right. So co-op work has a very defined, it's a defined term in immigration law. The co-op work permit is only for work that is integral to your studies. So if your study program requires you to work as part of your studies in order to graduate, that is what co-op work is. It's not work that you find, on your own to earn some money when you're studying. It has to be part of your studies. Okay.
Okay, thank you. And another question here is asking to clarify if when they arrive, they'll have to show the purpose of study letter. I think this maybe means the acceptance.
So the acknowledge, so the purpose of study, I'm wondering if this person is talking about their study plan. You don't have to show these kind of things like study plans or anything like that. You just need to show that you are going to go where you're going to study. If you've been accepted to Nipissing and you have your acceptance letter and you can show that you're going to, you have a plan to go to North Bay, great. But if sometimes you get people who land in Vancouver, for example, and they have no flight to go to Nipissing, right? And so to go to North Bay. So the officers are saying, well, what are you doing? What is your plan? I don't believe that you're actually going to go study in Nipissing, for example. Okay, so you need to show that you've been accepted. You're going to go and study in North Bay. Sometimes the officers, most of the time, you might just show the acceptance letter, the approval letter, and that's it. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay.
Elizabeth, if I can just jump in, there is a proof of enrollment letter that is accessible for the students once they have their Nipissing account.
Yes.
So once they've accepted and we've created their Nipissing account, they can also pull a proof of enrollment. So yeah, very good to have the acceptance letter, and then a proof of enrollment letter as
That's
well.
fantastic. The proof of enrollment is fantastic. That would be great if you guys brought that as well, just in case the officer asks.
Okay, so next question. This is a personal one. So, okay. At what age can dependent children work if they want to work in terms of getting the open work permit?
So I think that's whatever is reasonable. Obviously, if you have a 5-year-old who wants to apply for work, it's not going to work, right? We have child labor laws in Canada. So I think if you have someone who's a teenager, 14, 15 and above, we can apply for the dependent work permit now for them.
Great. Okay, and then we have a few questions about, one person is asking us to repeat the difference between common law and being legally married.
Okay, so when you're legally married, it's a marriage that's been recognized by the state. You have your marriage certificate, right? Common law, there's no recognition usually by the state that you're common law. It's just a state where you have been living for 1 year with your partner, right? You're in a conjugal partner, right? You've been living with them for 1 year. That then is common law status, common law relationship.
Great. And following up on that, can we apply for I think they mean the spousal work permit if the marriage is less than 12 months?
Oh, yes. If you have actually been married, then certainly you have your marriage certificate, then certainly you can apply.
Mm-hmm. And then again, on the spousal open work permit, does the spouse need to wait until the studying spouse starts studying to work, or can they work as soon as they have the work permit?
The spouse can start working as soon as they have the work permit. For you guys, you can only start working after you start studying. So before you start studying, you still, even though you can be in Canada, your student status actually doesn't really start. So you can only work when you are a full-time student in school. Okay, so don't start working before you actually start school. But for your spouse, their work permit is good from the time that they have it until it expires.
Great. During a semester that's in session, can I travel home for 3 to 4 days or for a week and then come back while still maintaining good academic standing?
I mean, I don't think that should be an issue with regard to your program unless the school says that you wouldn't be able to. I think, just for a few days that you're still enrolled as a full-time student, I don't think that would be an issue.
Mm-hmm.
Kyle,
and
do you think that would be an issue at all, or travel? No?
No.
Okay.
So how do you prove that it's a scheduled break? What document needs to be provided at the border to prove a scheduled break?
You don't have to provide documents at the border per se. When you enter Canada, you just need to show that you're enrolled. You have a study permit and you're enrolled as a student. That's enough, okay? It's when we apply for a post-grad work permit, if you are, you have to talk about when you're working or when you are not a student, right? And so it's pretty obvious. For example, when the school has a scheduled break, it's going to be on the academic calendar. So summer breaks, right? That's everybody has that. Scheduled breaks are what is applicable to everyone in the program. Okay, so it's on the academic calendar when you have scheduled breaks for your program.
Great. When can my spouse apply for his spouse visa? Maybe they mean the work permit. Can it be before the term starts?
You can certainly do it. You can do it together with yourself. When you had applied for your study permit, you can apply for your spouse spouse's work permit together with you.
Mhm. Okay, we have one here about the postgrad work permit. So if the program is for 16 months, then how long would the postgrad work permit be for?
If your program is, okay, so it really depends on whether it's 2 academic years. Okay, because 16 months, if there is no breaks, if you have no breaks in between, right, that can be equal to 4 semesters, and that could be equal to 2 academic years, and then you can get a 3-year work permit. But if your 16 months includes a scheduled semester break, right, then you only have 3 semesters, then you will likely only get 16 months. So it really depends on how many academic years are there, and not necessarily the calendar months.
Great. So here's one on synchronous learning. Is synchronous learning considered distance learning or not?
Synchronous learning, Kyle, is that where they have hybrid? They can do in class, or they can do remote?
Correct.
Okay. So in that situation, if you are in class and you are going to the campus, I would encourage you to do so. Okay.
Yeah, just to be clear, all of
Yeah.
our programs are offered on site, on campus, in person.
Yeah. So go in person to your class.
Great. We've had, let's see here, just some requests to receive, I think, the slides from this session. I know this session is being recorded.
So we'll send out the slides. It just takes me a few days to edit, but we'll certainly send out the slides and the recording in a few days.
Great. Okay, we have, so can a spouse apply for an open work permit if the other spouse is on a postgrad work permit?
Yes, you can, but right now the rules are that you yourself have to have a job offer in order for your spouse to also get a work permit as well. So your spouse's work permit is good until their work permit expires. Even if you finish your program earlier, their work permit is good until the work permit expires. But for them to extend their work permit, you have to have a job offer in order, and a postgrad work permit in order for them to extend their work permit.
Great. And will they be able to work full-time during authorized leave?
You cannot work at all, not full-time, not part-time. You cannot work at all during authorized leave. You're not considered a full-time student when you're authorized leave because you're on leave. So you can't use that time to, for example, to get your financials together and earn some money. You cannot do that. Okay, you cannot work at all. You can only take it off and stay in Canada as, doing no work, no study. Okay, so make sure that you don't do anything during your authorized leave.
Great. We have a question here about PR. So if my spouse is coming along with me on an open spousal work permit, can he get PR before my studies are done?
Yes, very possibly. Okay, so I don't want to say yes for sure because I don't know what your circumstances are. What I would suggest is that you both come to us for a consultation, and we can map out a plan and see what they would need to do in order to get permanent residence. But the nice thing about having a spouse, not only because you love them and everything, is that you can team up. You can double your efforts together. While you study, your spouse can work, and it doesn't matter who's the principal applicant, the whole family gets permanent residence together.
Right. Great. Just bear with me. I'm pulling up another question. How do I bring my family under my study permit to Canada if I've already arrived in Canada?
You can then apply for the work permit, study permits, visas for them at the visa post then.
Great. Let's see here. Most of these are getting to be pretty specific to individual situations.
I think we have some things, for example, is WES required for the study done outside of Canada for applying for permanent residence? Yes, if your permanent residence program requires you to show that you have a program completed outside of Canada, most of the time they will want the education credential assessment.
Great.
And do you see anything else there? Well, we have a lot of things here.
What about, is there a remedy if somebody discontinues their study due to an unavoidable circumstance like pregnancy, etc.?
In those kind of situations, you must ask the school for authorized leave for any sort of leave. If it's beyond the 150 days, then you will need to file a visitor extension to stay in Canada legally, okay? And then once you are ready to go back to school, then you should apply for a study permit at that time again.
Great. And here's one about working while studying. So for every course, students can work for 20 hours per week while studying?
Yes. Outside of Canada, outside of the campus. If you're in the campus, you can work full-time. Outside of the campus, you can work part-time. By the way, just wanted to qualify. When I said you need to reapply for a study permit, that's if you had gone beyond the 150 days. If you are just within authorized leave and you go back within 150 days, you don't need to apply for another study permit. Your study permit is still good. Okay, we have, I think, time for one more question. Mary, make it a good one.
What about, so will you get points under, this question is talking about for education done outside of Canada. Is that also considered for points?
It depends on which program. For express entry, yes, certainly is. Other points for example, for the OIMP employer-based points, yes, as well. For the most part, yes, your education is important, but you will have to get the education credential assessed to make sure that it's recognized as equivalent to a Canadian program as well. Okay. All right, guys. Well, we have sort of run out of time, but thank you all for joining us. And I think we will have another session later on this year, right, Kyle? To go over.
Yeah, absolutely. And
so.
yeah, thank you so much, Mary and Elizabeth. That was great. And for everyone on the call, if you have questions, as always, please reach out if they're admissions based to International Admiss, and for services, your arrival dates and so on to international support. I'll let Eve add anything as we're wrapping up here for the end of the call, but thank you for everyone joining and for staying with us throughout the call.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you, Mary and Elizabeth. Students, we are looking forward to welcoming you on campus here in North Bay, here in Canada. We will be sending communication about some future opportunities to connect with you just before you come, before you travel. We plan to have drop-in session where we'll be having targeted just conversation, Q&A, question and answers about either travel, about your courses, or in finances. So we will be sending those information as a mass communication. So do not expect, don't say I haven't yet received an email about those sessions. So we'll be sending those sessions, information about those sessions as a group. And we'll also be having targeted pre-departure orientation. In addition to the one that we just had, is it 2 weeks ago? We will be having targeted pre-departure session depending on where you are at. For example, those who have received their visa or those who are waiting to receive their visa. So those communication will be coming up very soon. we are going to want to make sure that you are well prepared before you are gone on the flights. And when you come here, we have a lot of resources and activities available to prepare you to succeed as you come here. So yeah, thank you for staying up later on your end, some of you, and we look forward to seeing you in the next sessions.
All the best, guys. Safe travels. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.